Do these 10 must-do tasks in July that will double your harvest this season. Wait for the end where I disclose the hack that I learned from the pros that is going to up your garden production. This is Amrita Bordeke and welcome to my channel. July is a critical month for garden maintenance, planting, and harvesting. The first one is weeding the summer garden. As the rest of your vegetables get a growth spurt and a boost this season because of the warmth, the weeds also get a huge boost. And they take away nutrients, space, and water from your precious plants. So it's important to keep on top of weeding. One of the best ways I tend to weed in my garden is when I do my evening walks or morning walks. As I'm doing the walk, and if I see a weed, I just take it out. That way, it doesn't get into this huge plant and it doesn't become very hard for me to manage it and be on top of it. The second way I really like to manage a lot of weeds is by mulching around the plants. And you can use compost or wood chips. I'm using stone gravel in my case here because I love the look that it gives my garden. It gives this organic, modern look while also keeping the space very clean. And that's very important for me. So I use pea gravel as mulch underneath most of my plants in my garden. In my raised beds, I use compost, at least an inch of compost that keeps most of the weeds popping up. If you do these two things, you will have a lot less issues with weeds than you would expect. As you can see, this was a larger weed that is coming out of my container because I had just taken a bunch of seeds and planted in this container. So I wasn't sure whether this was a weed or this was an actual plant. So I had left it to see whether or not it is big enough. You can definitely do it for some of the weeds you're unsure of because sometimes we're trying out new seedlings or you've forgotten, and even if you tagged it, maybe the tag went away or you forgot to tag your plant when you seeded it and you don't know if it is an intentional plant that you're growing or it is a weed. This is the best way to do it. The second one, which I really keep on top of during this time, is fertilizing. This is the time when fertilization is super important for your vegetable, flowers, and fruit trees. Now, a couple of ways that I fertilize is first by adding compost. For my vegetable raised beds or pots, I actually add compost to them so it is growing in a very healthy soil. But if you're growing it in ground, I would recommend adding at least 2 to 4 inches of compost before you plant anything in the ground, especially if you are dealing with poor quality soil. The second thing I do is when I am transferring a new seedling, I always add in the hole and around the plant. So I do a slow release fertilizer when I am planting the seedling itself, along with a mycorrhizal fungi. During this season, I would add another dose of a slow release fertilizer. I also absolutely love spraying kelp as a foliar fertilizer rather than just a watered down fertilizer because kelp is absorbed best as a foliar fertilizer. And I see such a huge boost in my roses, in my vegetables, and even in the tomatoes. My tomatoes love it when I spray kelp as a foliar fertilizer. I would recommend doing it early in the morning if you are using kelp because at that time the stoma is open and it is easier for the leaves to absorb the foliar fertilizer. It also reduces the chance of any fungal infections developing if you spray on it later on during the day and the leaf just sits with all that water on it. So I would definitely recommend doing it early in the morning so it has time over the whole day to dry off in the heat. It's also important to fertilize after you have weeded in the garden because otherwise that fertilizer is just going to boost all the weeds in your raised beds and your planters. The next one is watering. As the temperature rises in this month, it is very important to keep up with all the watering chores. Daily watering should be done for all the container plants that cannot retain as much water and all of your hanging baskets that you have in the garden. If you are growing perennials, then those should be thoroughly watered once a week. I usually try to deep water all my perennials, especially my roses, during the heat of the summer. And my temperatures temperatures usually here near the coastal area of Southern California don't go over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you know that you're getting a heat wave or you are going to get temperatures over 100 degrees, then that week I would water these roses twice a week and water them deeply for 5 to 10 minutes. I also am more worried about my water bills, especially because I live in California that was in drought for a lot of years and the water is quite expensive. So it's important for me to be careful with my watering, but also at the same time keep my plants happy during these hot summer months. And one of the best ways I do it in my garden is I have drip irrigation, and even the drip irrigation I adjust according to seasons. In summer, I have it for a little longer than the time I would have it for the rest of the year. I always make sure I check the watering system and make sure all the plants are getting good water at this time. So this is a good time to go outside and check on your drip irrigation and your watering system if you have any. Something new that I am going to try for myself, which is not new, it's like thousands of years old that people have been using this, but I have never used it and I'm trying out this year, is Oyas. And they are usually like clay pots that are placed in a container or in your raised bed, and then you plant around it so that it gives consistent watering throughout the week. Depending on the size of your Oya and the size of the container you're trying to water it, you might have to fill it maybe once or twice a week. So that is something I'm going to try out this year for my containers. I don't think I'm going to replace my raised bed watering as of yet with an Oya, but for containers, I think that will really help me watering it once a week and not worrying about it every week, especially for my indoor containers. I tested out Oya system, which was a smaller one for this indoor salad garden that I was creating in a small pot. I planted all the seeds and then I realized I was going out of town for 3 to 4 days, and I was like, oh my gosh, all these seeds are gonna die now. You have to keep the soil moist every day, and I was like, they're not gonna survive. So I ordered this on Amazon and I tried it out, and I'll post the results soon on my channel in one of the videos, and I'm testing it a little bit more on other things. But as far as I've seen so far, it did really well. I have to move a little bit because the sun was just in my eyes. The next one is pruning. Pruning helps you maintain plant health and will encourage flowering and better fruiting. If you are growing roses, this will be a great time for you to go out and deadhead your roses, and if they need a light prune on the roses. This is also a great time to harvest your herbs and give them a prune right before they go into a big, huge growth in summer. This is also a good time to prune your spring flowering shrubs. Once they have finished their blooms in spring, this will be a good time to prune them. When it comes to pruning tomato plants, I am trying something new this year, and I am not pruning my suckers. So I'd always heard that you should prune the suckers off of your indeterminate tomatoes so that you can get a much bigger, larger fruit. And what I noticed in my garden was that I was actually growing more indeterminate grape tomatoes and cherry tomatoes, and I also cared more about the quantity than just about the size of one tomato. So this year what I decided was, rather than prune off the suckers, I left the suckers on, gave them support on the lower and lean method that I was growing the rest of the tomato on, and just pruned off the actual lower leaves instead. As far as I have seen so far, I have definitely had a much higher amount of tomatoes compared to the even insane harvest I had last year. And I have such a tiny space, 2 feet by 4 feet, raised vegetable planters that I'm growing the vegetables in, and I only have 3 of them. So it's not like I have a lot of space. So I have to be very cognizant about how much production I'm getting out of each plant. And all the tomatoes that I'm growing, I have decided to grow them vertically so that it gives me a lot of space on the lower bed that I can use to plant different herbs and flowers and different vegetables in. The next is flower care. This is going to be a busy month for taking care of all your flowers, especially your roses. This is a great time to go and deadhead all of your roses if you haven't done so that it can go into their next bloom, especially your David Austins. Right now, as you see, my David Austins have kind of had their first huge bloom in spring, and to be able to rebloom well, I have deadheaded most of the climbing roses, and whatever is left, I am deadheading those. And Now I'm going to fertilize. If you are growing lavender, this is a great time to cut your lavender and store them for future use. So a very good time to harvest it. Some of the varieties can give you another set of blooms after summer. So you will get 2 sets of blooms and you will be able to harvest more lavender out of just one plant. If you're growing dahlias, this is a great time to make sure your dahlias are staked and keep them well watered and give them a good enough support system so that once they start flowering, that they will have a very good base created for them. The next one is pest management. Be vigilant for various pests like aphids and squash burrs and snails that I am dealing with in my own garden, and try to get to them before they can decimate your entire harvest. If you do have pest infestations, it is important to treat them immediately and take care of them as soon as possible so that you can save the rest of your plants. This is also a great time to support all your plants. In my case, I am tying all the new canes that are coming from my climbing roses and making sure that I am creating the kind of structure that I want for the climbing roses. If you're growing runner beans or tomatoes or even various squashes, make sure that you have a really good support structure for them. And especially if you are growing in small spaces like balconies or small backyard gardens, try using any of the vertical spaces that you might have so that it can increase your vegetable production. And as your plants are quite small at this point, it will help your plant if you create a good support structure at this point in time. This not only helps you use your space efficiently and increase your vegetable production, but it also makes your plants a lot more healthier. The next tip is to collect seeds for any of your spring harvest and vegetables that you had let go to seed. In my case, I have this beautiful arugula that went to seed and I let it be so that the birds could enjoy it during the spring months. And now I think a lot of the seed pods have dried, so it is a good time for me to go and collect as many seeds as I can and then remove the rest of the plant so that I could use that space for a new transplant of a squash plant that I have. If I had a larger space, I would have left this for the birds. I love the fact that it encourages so many birds to come into my garden and feed on the seeds. But because I have such a tiny space in my garden comes at a premium, and I cannot just leave a huge plant in there when I could plant a lot more other plants and have a longer gardening season. Now, this next tip is something that pros do, and I only recently started doing a lot more of it, and that is succession planting. I had always thought that once you plant a set of seeds, you just go ahead and then plant a new one 2 months later, and you just wait for the one set of seeds that you have planted to grow. But what I've realized pro gardeners do is they will plant multiple sections of transplants every week so that one, they have extra seedlings if some of their plants are eaten by pests or if they wither and die. And second, they also have seedlings ready in case you have space created. For example, in my case, I am taking out this arugula that went to seed and it's going to create a huge pocket of space in my raised bed. And now I have these squashes that have seedlings that are ready just because I had succession planted them. This basil plant that I brought, I'm going to show you how I am going to make 3 different plants out of this. I could make more if I wanted, but I'm just going to make 3. There's one clump up, and there's one second one, and then there's third one. Here we go. We have 3 different plants, and now I'm going to plant it in 3 different locations in the raised beds. The last tip I have is to make executive decisions that only you can make as a gardener for your own garden. For example, this strawberry plant looks fine. It's giving me a few strawberries every day. I'm going to remove this alpine strawberry that I had for the past 2 years. I feel like the production on it has significantly gone down this year and it's just taking up a lot of space. But Again, is it giving me as much as it can in this space, taking up almost an entire square foot of this tiny raised bed? Probably not. So maybe I can plant a different plant in here. What I'm thinking of is replacing this with bush beans. And if you're using the square foot method, you can grow about 9 bush bean plants in 1 square foot. So that might give me a lot of beans in the next month rather than just a few strawberries that I might get out of this. And I'm not going to discard it. What I'm just doing is I'm going to take it out of here and put it in a planter, so that I'm also going to make a house plant out of this, have this more indoors on the windowsill because it gets beautiful flowers and can also get strawberries, and then use this space for the beans. The other thing I'm doing is I'm also looking at pockets in my garden that are empty, like this planter that has an empty spot behind the geranium. And what I'm going to do is plant this beautiful black-eyed Susan that I got for my birthday from my aunt and uncle, so that it can create a gorgeous perennial in this container. Also give me a lot more time and beauty in this permanent space rather than the tiny container that it was in. I hope this helped you create a checklist for your July garden chores. But if you're wondering what kind of vegetables to plant in your garden, especially vegetables that can be good for your health, good for your gut, check out this video right here.